Hello, Mario here. Today we're going to talk about Adobe Premiere Pro. It's a lot of fun to edit films or short films in this package. It is a little tricky, so that's why we'll go through the whole interface and just show you highlighted areas that are important for you. Specifically, today we're going to talk about starting a project and how to manage those files, then create a sequence and the thinking that goes behind the settings in a sequence and what a sequence is. What is a sequence? Then once we have a sequence and a place to do our edit, then we can actually step back, look at the program and think, what are all these buttons for, or what are these frames for? What am I looking at? So we'll go through a quick introduction to the interface itself. Then we'll actually start bringing in some assets, some backgrounds, some overlays, maybe some sound, some music, some sound effects. Once we have our assets imported, then we're going to resize them and move them around. And once you know how to move them around, then you can start keying them so they look like camera moves. It's a lot of fun. Hope you enjoy it. So while we're working on Premiere, here's a couple tips for you to think about. Collect all your project files, all your assets, and put them in one folder, in one area. That way it's nice and organized. Match your sequence settings with your source. That might sound a little cryptic, but I'll explain that. Use PNGs, I'll explain that as well. Okay, you want to maintain your quality, right? PNGs are good for that. There's no camera in Premiere. There's a camera in After Effects, but there's not one in Premiere. So we do these fake camera moves that look good. People don't know we're faking it, but they're not camera moves, but they look like them. Export using Adobe Media Encoder. Okay, the last thing I want to preach to you is file organization. It's a boring subject, and I'm pretty sure you know what you're doing. But hear me out on these 3 tips. Okay, and I won't bug you about it anymore. As your project gets bigger, or as you get better at editing, you're going to find you're going to have more and more files. The worst thing that happens is you fire up a project and you're missing your background, or you're missing an overlay, you're missing a sound file, missing a sound effect. You may not even realize you're missing that sound effect until you've spent 5 hours exporting and finding out, oh crap, it's not there, or not even realize it at all until it's way too late. So you don't want to open up a project and it has these problems. So that's my first tip. Okay. The second reason why I'm telling you this is, let's say you're doing some edit on this computer and you jump over to that computer, you bring all your assets with you, but they don't line up automatically. Or you're going to have somebody else edit with you on their computer, and the assets don't line up, or they can't find those assets. So this is another reason why I am going to talk about file organization. The third tip with regards to file organization is to remember the first 2. So when it comes to file organization, I create a folder on my desktop. This is just my way of working. You can work a folder on your external drive or a folder on your storage drive, but pick one place for all your projects. For me, it's my desktop. It works this way. And in fact, actually, I usually have a year. So I go 2020, and then in there I go Project A. Okay? But pick a place where all your projects are. Create a new folder for that new project that you're going to work on. And then you can create subfolders like I have here that you're seeing on screen for your separate scenes, if there's multiple scenes in this edit. Or you can have a folder for your background or a folder for your music. But the most important thing is that you have a folder that all of your assets are going to go into. Okay? And then when you create your Premiere project, you create it in the same folder. Now the reason why I'm telling you this is you could pick up this folder, move it to a USB stick, bring it to another computer, and it'll work. You could pick it up, give it to someone who's going to do your edit for you, and it'll work. Okay, when it's all contained in the same folder, Premiere will look for the assets, and very rarely you have to remap things. So once you've created that folder and copied all your assets in there, if you took my advice, then you could start creating your project in Premiere. So when you fire up Premiere, new project, this comes up, and you'll see I browsed to that same folder where I put my assets, my files. Okay? And in my case, I called it My Amazing Film, because of course that's what it would be. I happen to name the project that as well. I guess that's an option. Okay, so the folder and the project name are about the same. Okay, it works. You'll notice I did one other change. If you work with animation, like I do, your display format should be in frames. We really don't care much about time code. We rather know how many frames or how long it is in frames, so we know how much there is to edit. Or how much there is to animate, of course. Now that our project is created, there's actually not a lot to look at. So let's first create our sequence, and then I'm going to explain the interface. Okay, so here I am inside of Adobe Premiere, and I haven't created my sequence yet. So I'm going to create that. File, New, Sequence. And I'm going to ignore all of these settings. And I'm going to create a new one. So I'm going to go up into Settings and change the edit mode to Custom. It's at the very, very top. So when you hit this arrow, a whole list is going to come up. Go to the very top of that and there's Custom. Once that says Custom, then you can match this with whatever you're working with. So in animation, we use 24 frames per second, 1920 by 1080. Here's that square pixel. Anything HD is square pixel. 48 Hertz is good for sound. And you can name this whatever you like. I leave the word sequence, and then when I export it, I rename it from sequence. In this case, it says sequence 2. I rename it from sequence 2 to whatever file name I want to export it as. But for now, let's just leave it as sequence 2. No, let's call it sequence 1. Okay, so now I actually have something to work with. I have my project tab up here. Okay, see, Premiere is like any Adobe package. It has all these different tabs that we're going to use. Okay, just like Photoshop, the project tab is where our assets go. This is where you drag your backgrounds into here, drag your sound files into here. Okay, don't drag animation in here, that won't work. Okay, we're going to drag our files into here. Our sequence, here's that sequence that we just created. This is the timeline that we're going to edit on. And the timeline has video layers that start with V and audio layers that start with A. So those are going to be the layers where we put our assets. And that's our timeline. So we actually have a playhead to play back. We have our sound meters, so we know if we're too loud, it hits red. It should never hit red. And this is our program. This is where we watch our edit. So this is not the raw stuff we're watching. This is whatever's in our edit over here. So if we do any color correction, we're going to see the color correction up here. These are the tools that we're going to use. But today, I'm pretty much going to use the select tool completely. Okay, so now that you have Premiere ready and you've created your sequence, now you can start bringing in your assets. Who wants to learn? Now your assets could be your background, could be other parts of that layout, like an overlay or an underlay, parts of it. If in case you separated your background into multiple layers, which works really well, you could just drag those all in and you drop them in the project tab. Okay, so you could drag in your music, you could drag in your sound effects, you could drag in, like I said, your backgrounds, Just don't drag in your animation. We have to treat the animation differently. Okay, so now that my sequence is created, I can start dragging in the assets into my project tab. So again, I'm going to look for the tab that says project. In my case, it's in the top left. It might be somewhere else for you. Here's my program, so that's where I'm going to watch my edit. My sequence is where my edit is. But my project tab is where I'm going to put my assets. If you're not seeing it, I'm currently under effects right now. You could try go to editing, and these are different interfaces, different looks to the interface that you could try. Okay, so even under edit, I could still see my project tab up here. There's also effects control, which we will use later, but we're looking for project tab. So now that I have my project tab, I'm going to go to where my files are and start picking out my files. So let's say I want my background. I believe I have one from camera 4 that I did in Blender. So I'm going to take that background that I've rendered out. I'm also going to need a little hovercraft that's part of this particular animation. And I can grab other stuff like, my sound files. I can grab my sound files. So I'm just selecting them using the control key. I could select different ones, right? So I got a couple backgrounds that I can work with. And I also have a sound file and just a prop of some kind. Okay, I'm missing one. There's one. Oh, that's pretty good. It's 301. And we could probably use one from here. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so I'm going to drag these all in. Now remember, I'm not dragging in my animation. Okay, so there you go. We can see all those parts are in here. Okay, so you brought in your backgrounds, you brought in your sound files, brought in all your other layout items. And now you're ready to bring in your animation. And I appreciate you waiting to this point. It will help you. It'll help maintain your quality. Okay, when you export your animation, you should always export it without the background, just the animation, and you export as a PNG sequence. This way you don't lose quality. If you export your animation as a video file, which many people do, you will lose quality. So if you do have a PNG sequence, this is how you import it. You go File, Import, and you click on the very first frame to bring in the sequence. And you have to tell it that it's a sequence. And you'll see me do it in just a second. After you bring it in, though, there's one extra step, and this is to play back that sequence properly. If it's animation, we play it back on 24 frames per second. So what you're looking at here is how we modify it after we bring it in. Again, you're going to see me do this as well. So when you're in the Project tab, you right-click the asset, click Modify, or Interpret Footage. That brings this up. And if you notice, I set it to 24 frames per second. By default, Premiere will bring it in at 2997, which won't play right. Let's do that. Okay, so let's import some animation. So, File, Import, and I'm going to browse to some of my wacky animation that I have, or some weird stuff that I've done in green screen. Yeah, maybe let's grab one of my crazy green screens, which is the same as animation. I would export them as PNG sequences, just like this. And that means there's one file per frame. Okay, but instead of selecting all, I'm just going to select the first frame of the animation. And then make sure that image sequence is ticked. What that does is it'll treat this like a video. So I got the first frame, image sequence is ticked. That's not the one I want. Let's do this one. There we go. Another crazy one that I have. Here we go. select the first frame, image sequence ticked, hit open. So here it is here, and you can see by default it's going to play back at 2997. So it's not going to play back properly, so we have to modify this animation to play correctly. Right click it, I'm in the project tab, right click that asset, modify, interpret footage. Now I assume the frame rate is 24 frames per second. And I hit OK. And now you can see it's going to play back at 24 frames per second. Now you'll notice it's just one file. Even though it's a whole sequence, it actually shows only as one file. So if I put this in my timeline, I could drag this animation into my timeline and hit the spacebar to hit play. You can see the craziness that I'm up to. I gotta fix that green screen too. But it's always fun. Oh, missing an arm. That's not good. Alright, okay. Now we have all our assets imported. We have them running and playing at with the right settings. Let's drag them into our timeline and start editing, finally. And we'll have to resize some of them. So you'll see me resize some of the assets as well. Let's do that. Alright, let's start dragging some of these assets in. I have a background here. Okay, it's quite large actually. I'm going to drag that background in. So I'm just dragging it in. And you can see that by default it's actually going to play for 5 seconds. Now it's really hard to see because it's really small there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this control bar here at the bottom, to this navigation bar, to see this better. I can move side to side by grabbing the center of this bar. I can also zoom in by grabbing one side of the bar and pulling it, and that'll zoom in so I could see my edit better. See, now I can see that it's 5 seconds. Okay, so this lets you zoom in as well as move side to side. So let's say I want my background playing for 10 seconds. Well, I'm going to grab one side of it and drag it to 10 seconds. And there you go. You could see that background. Okay, now let's say I want the bank better centered in this image. Well, I could double click it right here. Double click it and just drag it around to recenter. Now, as I showed you before, when I looked at this image, there was a lot more to it. Watch when I double click it. It's going to open it in the source window. Double click it, and you can see it now in my source window, and you can see the whole thing. Whereas in my program, we're looking at the edit. It's only showing part of it. But I can move it around. So a good way to center things and move things around is actually not to keep it at fit, but to set this at 25% or 10%. Yeah, our window is going to be smaller, but we can actually see the size of the asset. And this lets us scale it. Okay, and I'm holding the Shift key to maintain perspective. And now I can center it. And that's saved inside of this edit. And now when I want to see it full screen again, I set this back to fit. So I'm still not seeing the entire background, but I am seeing the part that I want, and I have it centered the way I want. Don't mind this little circle. This is a pivot point where we rotate this, if we are rotating it. Okay, I'm going to drag another background into my edit. And this time, I'm going to layer some stuff on top of it. Let's see what it looks like. So I'm going to drag another background that has a different perspective and layer in one of my wacky green screens There we go. So now I have this green screen crazy stuff on top of this background. Okay, now this is oversized and I don't mind the background too much. I'm kind of liking the background, but it's not long enough time-wise. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to extend it time-wise to match. Otherwise, I'd have no background at one point. So I'm going to extend the background. And I'm going to resize this craziness here, this part of the animation or green screen. Now you can, what I do, I like to lock these backgrounds so I don't break them, I don't move them. But I do want to scale this one down. So I'm going to select that, double click it here, and scale it down. Yeah, let's just have it go across the screen maybe. There we go. So you can see I could scale the different assets as different layers and move it around. Now if I hit play, we're going to see that first background, and then it's going to switch over to this background with that crazy animation. Yes, I'm good at that. Okay. All right. Let's say we want to key some of our animation. Let's say we want to key this across the screen. Well, the way we do that is with the effects control. It's another tab that we haven't used yet. So I'm going to click on the effects control, and it might be empty. If it's empty, that's okay. That just means you have to click on the asset that you want to work with. So I want to work with this hoverboard thing, and you can see it populates right away. And you could also see when I double click it and move this around, you can see these position coordinates change. So Premiere is keeping track of where this animation is. Okay, it's also keeping track of scale. So if I scale it, you'll see the scale change. So now that we know that Premiere is storing this information, we can actually store it in a key and have it transform from one key to another key. Basically, we can have it move across the screen. So let's put it in our starting position. Put my playhead at the start. You'll notice also that the two playheads match. And I'm going to tell Premiere to remember these coordinates. So I'm going to hit the stopwatch right on the left here. And you can see it created a key with those coordinates. So that's my starting key. I'm going to move my playhead to the end. And as soon as I move this character, it's going to automatically make another key. I don't have to hit the stopwatch anymore. It's going to automatically make the key that we need. So playhead at the end. Double click the character, move it across the screen. And you can see it's generated a key for me. So I'll put my playhead at the beginning again and hit play. Wow, is that ever slow and choppy. Not sure why it's gone choppy on me. I guess it's the recording. If we want it faster though, we bring the keys closer together. That way it has to travel the same distance, but over a shorter amount of time. Hit space, and it's faster. Closer, and faster again. You can also keep backgrounds. So let's go back to this background. And let's say I unlock that background. and I set the background where I want it to start. So let's say I'm going to start there. Turn on positions in the effects control, because now it's on this. Remember, every time you click on an asset, it populates the effects control with that asset. So again, put my playhead at the beginning of that asset. Turn keys on with the stopwatch. And that key will remember my starting position. Put my playhead at the end. Double click and move my background wherever I want it to finish. And you can see it automatically created another key for me. So now, if I put my playhead back at the beginning, hit play, I have a pan. Okay, it's stuttering a bit, and that's because I'm recording. Yeah, there it goes, it's smoothing out a bit. And then it switches on to the next crazy thing. Hopefully that was fun, a little crazy, but hopefully it helped you. Just to close off, here's those couple tips again. Collect your files all in a folder. That way you can move that folder around and have different people edit if you need to. Match your sequence with your source. So my sources from animation were 1920 by 1080, 24 frames per second with a square pixel. When I created my sequence, I created it with the same settings. That way I didn't lose quality. Another way not to lose quality is I exported all of my files, my background, any layers that go with that background, even the animation. I exported an animation sequence as PNGs. PNGs will make sure you don't lose quality. And Premiere doesn't have a camera, so we move layers. And it looks like a camera move. Let everybody believe it. Just don't tell anybody else. Only you know. And the other 3 people that follow me. Hope this was fun. Enjoy. Hello, Mario here. Today we're going to talk about Adobe Premiere Pro. It's a lot of fun. It's a great program. Great to edit your films or your short films. In today's talk, we're going to cover, or not. Damn hotkey. Okay, let's fix that. So, by now you know me. You know I like my tips. I'm all about the tips. I'm all about the tips. I'm all about